Greetings everyone. Welcome to our day 10 session in PMP6 exam prep step by step. In our last session, we have done project scope management. And we have finished up with the last three processes in project scope management. So essentially, till today, we have done two knowledge areas. One is integration, project integration management, and another is project scope management. Today we'll step into our next knowledge area, which is project schedule management. So let's have a look at where we are from our process table. This is our familiar process table. And in our last session, as we have just said, we have done project scope management. There were 6 processes and we went through 2 days. Today, we are moving into schedule management, project schedule management. And if we look at it closely, we'll see there are 5 processes in the planning process group and 1 in the monitoring and controlling process group. This again, like our scope management, is a bit long. Quite a few number of processes are here. And so we'll cover it in 2 days. Now let's look and take an overview. Schedule management is about managing timely completion of project. We have looked at the 3 primary objectives in managing project. One is the scope, another is schedule, another is cost. Here in this knowledge area, we are ensuring that we complete the project in a timely manner. The first process that we'll look at is the plan schedule management. Plan schedule management is about putting together a roadmap or a plan. How we'll go through the schedule management, how we'll go through all the different processes in schedule management. So it is like a guidance document. It is a roadmap. It is not, in this process, we are not drawing the schedule. Then we look at define activities. If you remember, in our last knowledge area, we created create WBS or work breakdown structure. And the lowest level component in the work breakdown structure was what we call work package. We have broken down or subdivided the scope and gone and divided into different work packages. Here, what we do is we take these work packages and in define activities, identify what are the specific activities, what are the specific tasks that we need to do to accomplish this particular work package. Then we move to the next process, which is sequence activities. Now, sequence activities is about defining logical sequence. What it really means is, now that we have identified all the activities that is required to accomplish different work packages, to deliver the project, we will find that there are dependencies. Dependencies in the sense that there will be some activity that can be done only after another activity gets finished, and so on and so forth. So in sequence activities process, this particular process, sequence activities, we find out what are the logical sequences, which one comes first, which comes later, and what is the relationship, and so on and so forth. Then we move to the next process, which is estimate activity durations. For each of the activity, we find out how much time will it take. So we look through each activity and what is the work package, and we determine what is the amount of time that will be required to accomplish each of these activities. So now you see, we have three important elements. One is, what are the activities, how much time it will take each of this activity, and what is the sequence, which one comes first, which one comes later. Now we take these three inputs and develop our schedule. So when we develop our schedule based on these three elements that we have determined in these previous three processes, we will have a roadmap that will tell us what we are going to do at what point of time and who will be doing it and so on. So essentially, we would have charted our journey and we'll know exactly what will be finishing at what point of time and who is going to do what. And in this, we'll also have something called control schedule, a process, which is about monitoring and managing changes. So what it really means is, we have put together a plan, we have developed a schedule. But when we are actually executing the project, we would like to ensure that our project is going according to the schedule we developed. And this is the objective of the control schedule. We want to see if there is any deviation. Are we getting delayed? And if there are deviations from the schedule that we develop, we will have to take some action to bring our project on track. So this is the control schedule process. So let's look at the first process, which is plan schedule management. Now, plan schedule management, in terms of process, the inputs we'll have is project management plan, because there will be other plans that we have drawn, and then we'll have project charter, and we take this input. What we do with this input is, we'll talk about to experts, get their judgment, do some data analysis, and as an output, we'll come up with the schedule management plan. What the schedule management plan is? It is a document that will tell us how we should move forward in managing schedule. So in terms of scheduling overview, this is how it goes about. First and foremost, we'll decide on some scheduling method. Maybe we'll think of, let's say we take the critical path method, or maybe we will say we'll take an adaptive approach. So we'll determine what kind of scheduling method we want to take. Then we'll decide on some particular tool. Let's say it's a Microsoft project or some other tool, whatever it is. So we decide on the tool. Then what we do is, we create a model within that tool based on the scheduling method by putting in project information. Project information is, what are the different activities and what is the duration of each of them, and so on and so forth. So we take all this project information, put it in the tool, and based on the scheduling method we have decided upon, and this is what is going to give us the scheduling model. And this particular scheduling model will give us the project schedule. That is what we're going to take forward when executing the project. Now, when we have drawn that schedule management plan, let us see what it will look like, what it will have. The first and foremost is the project schedule model development. In other words, what is the methodology we'll use? What is the tool that we'll use? These are things that we'll mention in this particular plan. Then we'll talk about release and iteration length. For example, if you are taking an adaptive approach, we'll mention what will be the time box, what will be the length of the time box, how much time, and what is the iteration length, and so on. We'll talk about level of accuracy. Now, when we are doing a scheduling, it cannot be 100% correct because it is an estimate after all. And beyond the fact that it is an estimate, there will be some uncertainty due to different factors. Taking into consideration on all this, we'll put an accuracy. Let's say we'll say, well, this is a scheduled estimate of plus minus 5%. So we are saying that we should be within the plus and minus 5% accuracy on this particular estimate. And so this is what we'll mention in this schedule management plan. Then we'll talk about the units of measure that will follow, because all of us who are involved in this schedule process should be on the same page in terms of units of measure. So for example, if in terms of effort, are you talking in terms of days or putting in terms of hours? Or or if there are any other units that is there, so we will mention this in this particular schedule management plan, so everyone who is involved in the scheduling process use the same measurement. Otherwise, there will definitely be some confusion. Then we'll mention about the organizational procedural links. In other words, the framework or the work breakdown structure that we talked about. So that is something that we'll mention in schedule management plan. We will also mention in this plan what is the model maintenance, schedule model maintenance, how are we going to update the status, and so on and so forth. Then there is an important point again, which is control threshold. Now, control threshold is that threshold or that line. When we cross that, some action needs to be taken. For example, let's say the control threshold maybe 15 days. If there is a delay of 15 days, then we need to take some action. So this is because we don't want to get into all this process for every day of delay, every time there is a delay of 1 day or so. So we'll have a threshold, and typically what will happen is if there is a delay of, let's say, 10-15 days, whatever we take up, we might confer with our stakeholders, raise a report, exception report, inform our user, and then come together and see how we need to correct the situation. Is it a trend? Will there be more delay going forward, and so on and so forth? So there has to be some action taken when we cross that threshold. Then we'll also put together what will be the rule of performance measurement, rules of performance measurement. How will we measure the variance? For example, one is the earned value management, which we'll discuss in more details in our next knowledge area. So how will we measure the variance? And then, for example, if we are updating the status complete and say 50% complete, then how are we deciding on that? If it is 50% conflict or complete. So whatever it is. So what kind of rules will apply in measuring our performance? And then we'll also talk about how we'll be reporting. What will be the format? How frequently we need to report, and so on. So these are some of the things that will be mentioned in the schedule management plan. The steps that we'll take during scheduling is, first of all, we'll take the work package. The scheduling starts with work package. Work package is what we got as the lowest level component in the WBS. we take each of this work package and we identify activities. What are the activities for each of this work package? And all the activities after we have identified, we'll see what is the relationship between them. Which one comes first, which one comes later, and so on and so forth. And then for each of them, each of the activity that we have identified will determine the duration, how much time each of these activities will take. Once we have the duration, once we have what are all the activities, and once we have the sequence among them, we can put them together and develop our schedule, which will be the basis on which we'll move forward in the project the way we go ahead in the project. Now, how does it, what will be the difference when we take different life cycles? For example, if we are taking the predictive approach, we know it goes in a sequence and we have one deliverable at the end. So what we're going to do, we start everything together and we get the big WBS, we have all the work packages, and we will, from the work packages, we'll determine all the activities, and from all the activities, we'll develop the schedule and move forward in the project. In adaptive, if you remember, it is different because in adaptive, we don't take everything at the same time and there is an iteration. So the way we will take it forward, these processes will be something like this. We take the features that we want to take in the first iteration from the backlog and we take through an iteration. We do the identify activities, we then sequence activities, we estimate the duration, we develop the schedule. So we go through that, fine tune it, and then we do the execution. During the execution process, we will do a control schedule, we'll control the schedule, and we'll validate the scope and hand it over to our customer. Then once that iteration is done, we have handed it over, or we have finished with that those features and completed the deliverable. We get into the product log again and take the next set of features and go through the same iteration process, validate scope, and create the deliverable. Then we move through the next set of iteration. So this is how we move on in the adaptive life cycle. So with this, we have gone ahead and done the planning. And once we have done the planning, we will move into our next process, which is define activities. So now we have a schedule management plan in place. And based on the plan, we will go ahead with subsequent activities. So the first one is define activities. So define activities, as we have said, will be based on our work package. So what are the inputs? Project management plan, and in that plan, we'll have all these baselines, and the typical one is just, for example, the scope baseline, and which will have the WBS and so on and so forth. Now, and of course, the environment factor, organization process assets, because organizational process assets will tell us what has happened in the past and so on in previous projects. It will give us an idea and all that. And then we take certain tools. Most important tools that we'll use are decomposition or rolling wave planning. We'll talk about them. And finally, when we have done or we have gone through this particular process, define activities, the output that we'll get is the activity list, which is the list of all the activities, and attributes. of all these activities, different attributes pertaining to scheduling. And then we'll also have the milestone, and if there are any changes that needs to be done, and so on. So let's look at what happens when we are defining activities. Now, defining activities is about decomposing work packages into activities. So work packages, if you remember, are subdivided deliverables that we identified in the scope that were subdivided and got into that level. And we talked about 880 rule, and we got into a place where we can actually now understand how this work package can be done. And so when we arrived at that, we are able to visualize how we'll be doing that. What are the steps, what are the tasks, what are the activities that we need to accomplish that particular work package. So when we're decomposing, we want to make sure that each of these activities that we have, or what the activities for this work packages, is not less than 8 hours, not more than 80 hours, 880 rule. We should ensure that we include even the project management activities. We should not leave out that, or even the quality activities. For example, you might do some quality testing and so on, and we don't want to leave out those activities as we are identifying the activities. We also should ensure that activity that we identify are complete activities. In other words, it should not be half. For example, this particular activity should be able to deliver something, however small it is. For example, if you are painting, let's say an activity painting a room, you don't say, okay, one activity is painting half the room, another activity is painting another half of the room. It has to be a complete activity. Then there is this concept of rolling wave planning. Rolling wave planning essentially is the concept that we plan in details what is very near to us, and something that is far away, we don't plan in detail because probably we think we don't know enough to actually plan in detail at this point of time. When we get there, closer to that, we are going to actually plan those. So in a way, it looks like this. So it looks like this. So let me okay. Now, so what you see here is this green line is a planning curve. So at this point, what you see on the top as we start, the planning activity is at the maximum because we are doing planning. Once you have done the planning, our planning activity goes down, and here, which is the execution curve, the execution starts happening. And so execution activity keeps on going up. At this point, and when the execution activity is on the peak, we have done all the execution or almost done all the execution, and it is time to start planning again. So we pick up on planning activities, and which point this particular execution will keep on coming down. And at this, when it reaches the top, this planning means we have now planned and we are ready to start executing. At this point, planning goes down and our execution starts going up. So what you are seeing is at the whatever is near term activities, we are planning in details, and we go ahead and execute, and then when we reach in the next stage, we plan in details the next stage and go on and so forth. So this is what is called rolling wave planning. Then again, the next thing that we have to do when defining activities is validate in some way the outputs that we have got out of defining activities. And in this respect, we need to ask certain questions. One is, the activity that we've identified, can it be realistically estimated? Because at the end of the day, we need to be able to estimate. Now, if I keep it at a very big chunk and we have not broken it up enough, then it will be difficult for me to estimate realistically. And then, can it be completed quickly? Because again, if it is, I kept one activity that it will take for, let's say, 1 month, then it will be no good for my planning purpose. So it should be completed reasonably quickly, each of these activities. It should also be completed without interruption. For example, there is an activity and in between I've identified one activity, and in between I have to stop so that someone else can finish some work before I can resume this particular activity. Now that is not a good way to define. We have to ensure that each activity we have identified can be completed without any interruption. And then we'll also have to think, can it be contracted out? Can we give this activity out to someone? So these are some tests that we have to think about on these activities, so that these activities is in a shape that we can use for planning well. Now, as an output from this process, one of the output will be activity list. Activity list really is the list of all the scheduled activities. We have found from all the work packages, all the activities, all the scheduled activities. This is that list, and on this, each of this activity will put an unique ID or title, so that we can identify, when we're talking later on, we will identify exactly which activity we are talking about. And of course, we want to put some description as well. What is this activity about? Now, for each of this activity, we'll also put together attributes. And when we talk about attributes here, it is pertaining to the scheduling. So we take each of the activity, and the first thing is and we have the ID for this activity. We will also associate with which WBS ID or work package has given rise to this activity. This is, of course, we need to identify, and this is one of the attribute. Then we'll talk about activity description, and we'll talk about predecessor. Which are its predecessor activities? In other words, which one should be completed? Which activity should be completed before I can initiate this particular activity? See, in the same breath, we should also identify which is the successor activities. Which are the activities that is depending on this particular activity? In other words, though dependent activities or successor activities cannot take place unless we are done with this particular activity. Which are the successor activities? We also want to talk about the logical relationship. Now, if this particular activity is dependent on another activity, does it mean that I can start this activity only after the predecessor activity is finished? Or can I just start this activity as soon as the predecessor activity started? What is the kind of relationship that we have? And then, is there any lead and lag? For example, if I'm saying that this particular activity has to finish or start only after the predecessor activity has finished, does it mean that I can start this immediately after the predecessor is finished? Or do I have to wait for some time, which is the lag? So we'll talk about this a little more. Then what is the resource requirement for this particular activity? What is the resource that is required? And when we talk about resource, there might be different kinds of resource that is required for this activity. Maybe some materials, maybe some facilities, maybe some human resource. So what are the resource requirements for this activity, for this particular activity? We'll also talk about, or what is the are there any imposed dates? When we are scheduling, lot of times you'll find there are some activities where there are some imposed dates, meaning we might say that this particular activity cannot take place or cannot start before this date for whatever reason, or has to finish by that particular date. So these are imposed dates. So are there any imposed dates on any particular activity? And then, of course, what are the constraints and assumptions on this particular activity? This is also something that we'll add as activity attribute. So this will give us the activity list and activity attributes. And then finally, we'll talk about the milestones. What are the milestones? So milestone is generally a significant point in a project. It is a point when we reach that point, reach the milestone, maybe we'll take some action or there will be something that happens. For example, if there might be a milestone at completion of each phase of the project, and when we finish each of the phase, let's say requirement phase, there will be a review process. And sometimes at the completion of each phase, maybe the fund for the next phase will come in. So there might be some actions that is taken, external action that will be taken at each milestone. But these milestones or we'll put it in our schedule as an activity with zero duration. It is not that we are doing something at that point of time. It is just that we have reached that point. And these milestones can be mandatory or optional. Sometimes it is mandatory by contract. For example, if you are delivering something to the customer might put a mandatory milestone in the contract saying that, hey, once you do a requirement, I want to have a look at it. I want to take it through a review process before you step into the design. So that milestone, you will have a milestone at the end of the requirement, so some review process can take place. Similarly, after the design, after the construction, and so on and so forth. So milestones can be mandatory or can be optional. So that was the process, which is define activities. Now let's look at the next process, which is sequence activities. We talked about first we define the activities, and then once we have got all the activities, we will look at the sequence. Which one comes first, which one comes later. This process, the input will have, again, the project management plan. In other words, the schedule management plan, and we'll have this project documents, for example, what activities we have defined, and then, of course, environmental factors and organization process assets. And the tools that we'll use in this particular process primarily will be precedence diagram. We'll talk about that. and of course, dependency determination, leads and lags, and PMIS we'll talk about. Schedule network diagram is what will come out as the output, and of course, some project document updates. Now, sequence activities, when we have done the sequence activities, it will be something like this. Basically, if we draw a map, a network of what happens first, what happens afterwards. So when we do that, every activity that we have identified should be connected to one predecessor or successor, except of course the first and the last. So, so this is how we determine. So we put together which comes before, and what we'll find at the end is, excepting the first and the last, all the other ones should have a predecessor and a successor. The relationship we determine should be realistic. We should actually see what is going to happen on the ground and then determine the relationship between two activities. For example, if we say this has to be finished only after the previous one is finished, then we have to have some reasoning behind it why it is that. So there has to be a realistic relationship. If there is a lead and lag, for example, one activity has to wait before the previous one is finished, we have to take that into consideration. Or even if it can start before the other one is finished, that also is something that we call lead, and we have to take that into consideration when we are sequencing the activities. Now, all this might look very complicated, and if this one and even the developed schedule. But in reality, when we are running a project, all this will be done through project management software. And that is also, we talked about PMIS, and we will dump or basically feed in all this data into the project management software, and that project management software will, in reality, or in the actual real scenario, we'll draw this sequence and determine the sequence, and then we'll have to probably go there and fine-tune it and so on. And this sequence of activities is really the first step in drawing the developed schedule or in getting to the schedule baseline. Now let's look at some of the concepts that come into the precedence diagram, because it is we are going to go through this precedence diagramming in coming up with that sequence of activities. Now the first relationship that we'll talk about is finish to start. Now finish to start really means that activity B can start only after activity A has finished. It is finished to start. Predecessor or successor activity B can start only after predecessor activity A has finished. Now let's take an example. Let's say we are building a PC. We assemble the PC and then we install the operating software. Now, we can install operating software only after assembling of PC is finished. We can start installing operating software only after assembling of this PC is finished. So it's a finish to start relationship. Then there is this relationship which is finish to finish, which says that activity B or the successor activity B can finish only after activity A is finished. It can start anytime. It's unlike the previous one. It's not saying that it can start after A is finished. It can start before A is finished, or even before probably activity has started. It doesn't matter. This is not a condition. But what the condition is that activity B can finish only after activity A has finished. Now, if we take an example, let's say we are writing a document. We are writing a user manual, and someone is writing a user manual and someone else is editing that document, proofreading. Now, we can say that they have a finish to finish relationship. In other words, activity B or edit document can finish only after activity A, write document, has finished. Write document can start, and a little later, anytime, edit document can start. It can go on parallel. So the portion, the edit document can happen only for those portions where the writing has been done. But the writing and editing of the document can go together. But we cannot finish editing of the document unless writing of the document is complete. So it has a finish to finish relationship. Then there is one which is start to start relationship, which really says activity B can start only after activity A is finished. And then after that, activity B can even finish before activity A. It doesn't matter. But activity B can start only after activity A has started. If I take an example, which is the poured foundation. Now, after you start pouring the foundation, in a foundation, you can start leveling the concrete. You cannot do leveling of concrete before you have started the pouring of the foundation. Then there is one which is a bit odd, which says start to finish, which is really, this says activity B can finish only after activity A has finished. It is a relationship, it takes a while to wrap around because it's not a very common one. So if we take activity A as shutting down old accounting system and activity B as starting new accounting system, what we're saying is starting of new accounting system cannot finish unless shutdown of old accounting system has started. So this is a start to finish relationship. So there are 4 relationships: finish to start, FS, and these are terms that will come very often when you develop the schedule. Then finish to finish, start to start, and start to finish. When we are doing this precedence diagramming, there are a couple of cautions, warnings that we need to hit. One is, between 2 activities, there cannot be multiple relationships. We cannot say activity B and activity A has finished to start relationship and at the same time it has start to start relationship. That will create issue when you actually plan. And the second thing is, we need to avoid any kind of closed loop. For example, we cannot say that activity B can start after activity A is finished. Activity C can start after activity B is finished, and activity A can start only after activity C is finished. Then it is a closed loop, and then there will be issues when you are actually developing the schedule. We also need to think about different types of dependencies, or rather the dependencies that we have. Where does these dependencies emanate from? Now, There are two types of dependencies in terms of mandatory and discretionary. Mandatory dependencies are those dependencies that you cannot avoid. In other words, it typically comes out of some physical limitation or maybe some contractual, in the contract, some contractual clause. Let's say you are building a house. You cannot start building the structure until you have finished the foundation. There is a dependency between building the structure and the foundation, and there's a physical limitation, and it is mandatory. Or maybe you have a contract. You are building something from the client, and the client says you can start construction only after audit has taken place on the design. So there is something that is mandatory and it is coming out of the contract. So there can be mandatory dependency, there can be discretionary dependency. Similarly, some of these dependencies might be external. External is when the dependency comes from outside the project activities, and internal is when it is within the project activities. For example, you are going, you have to start this testing activity, and before this testing activity is done, the test environment has to be set up. And let's say the test environment is set up by an external agency. And in that case, you are dependent on some external entity, and that's an external dependency. But if this test setup is being done by your project team, then it is an internal dependency. So dependencies from that perspective can be external or internal. And when we look at that, you can have mandatory, which is external, or mandatory, which is internal. Similarly, it can be discretionary, which is external, and discretionary, which is internal. Discretionary dependencies are those dependencies that is within the control of the project team. And probably it is because of some best practices that you want to follow that. But if push comes to or shove comes to push, you can actually relax that a little bit. That is possible. So that is a discretionary dependency. Then there is the concept of lead and lag. When we are talking about this relationship, finish to start or start to start, with that relationship, there can be lead or lag. So let's look at how does this look. Now let's take an example of lead. Let's say we have an example which is we are doing some work and in a house, and there are two activities. There's some electric work that needs to be done and a painting needs to be done. Now we don't want to do painting before the electric work is completed, because then when the electric work is done, again we have to repaint any kind of things that is done on the wall because of the electric work. So what we need to do is our relationship is electric work is finished and then we'll start the painting. But then we realize that we don't need to wait for all the electric work to be finished. We can start the painting even before the electric work is finished. So let's say we decide that we'll have a lead of 5 days. For example, electric work is maybe finishing on 15th day, but we can start our painting on 10th day. And so that we will go and do the painting where the electric work is done, and by that time the rest of the electric work will be done, and so we can paint that area as well after that. So we can take a lead of 5 days. We don't have to wait till electric work is totally completed before we start with the painting work. So this is the concept of lead. And similarly, there is a concept of lag. Concept of lag is, let's say we are doing a painting, and there are two activities. One is primer coating and one is painting. So to do the paint, we first coat with primer and then we go ahead and paint on top of that. So that will be a quality painting. So our relationship is finish to start, because we have to finish the primer coating and only then we can start the painting. But then we realize that the primer, after the primer coating, we have to give some time for it to dry before we can start the painting. We cannot immediately start painting after the primer coating is done. So what we'll do is we'll put a lag. What we'll say is primer coating is done and there will be 3 days I will wait after that, and then painting can be done. So we say it is an FS relationship with 3 days lag. So this is the concept of lead and lag. As an output from the sequence activities, what we'll really get is the project schedule network diagram that we talked about. And in this network diagram, as you can see, we'll have different kinds of relationships. For example, between K and L, it is finish to start. For example, if you look at B and C, it is start to start relationship. And for example, if you see F to G, it is finish to start, but it is with a 15 days lag. So you will have in this sequence diagram or the network, schedule network diagram, all sorts of relationships coming together based on what are the activities you have found and what are the relationships you have determined. So with this, we have finished this particular process. Our next process will take up in our next session, which will be tomorrow. So thank you for being with me, and I'll see you tomorrow at the same time.